And maybe it's just your Kiwiism where you guys think you're being mean, but you're so polite. It's like everything that you and Christy Flip say sounds polite. Welcome to the LeadrPulse Podcast, the podcast with actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. I'm Holly Tate, your host and Chief Marketing Officer here at Leadr. In today's episode, Matt and Pat unpack, that's a really hard to say, Matt and Pat unpack this concept of public accountability. This has been a big part of Matt's journey over the past year as a leader. And so Matt and Pat together talk about what does it look like to call out our team members and hold them accountable publicly, but in a healthy and respectful way. So let's take a listen to today's episode.
One of the things that you've taught that has helped my leadership the most is this idea of accountability should happen in a public setting, peer accountability with everybody in the room. And the things when I've changed the most and when someone's checked my motives the most and I've had to adjust my leadership the most is not when someone's pulled me aside and had a one-to-one conversation. It's when it's called out in a healthy way in the room. Do you want to talk about that? Because I think it's quite a hot take. Most of the time people would say, practice it in private, do those conversations confidentially and don't embarrass your colleagues. But I think you would say that's wrong, yeah?
Yes, I think in most situations, if you have a team where there's some trust, good trust, and it's a good team. In other words, you're not suspecting that 2 or 3 of your executive team members should be fired. You should be let go. But it's like, no, I like my team. Everybody's got their flaws, but this is a good team. Calling them out on their issues in front of their teammates with respect, but with clarity and directness is good for 2 reasons. First of all, and maybe 3 reasons. First of all, everybody in the room hears what you had to say. And so they now are like, oh, if he told Fred not to do that, then I probably shouldn't do that either. Good to know. The other one is the people in the room are now going, oh, he holds people accountable. I don't have to wonder about that or go ask him, hey, are you going to tell Mary or Fred that they need to do this differently? It's like, oh, I just heard them do it.
Right.
Third, it creates kind of a culture where it says, this is what we do with one another. It's a sign that we trust each other and care enough. Now, the time where it's not appropriate is when you are really questioning that person's fitness on the team. And so this is becoming now sensitive, really a corrective action, if you will. That then might very well violate the dignity of that person. And sometimes then it's better to pull them aside after the meeting and go, I need to tell you, this is very serious. You need to change this. And I'm wondering if this is going to work, if you don't. Even when you do it that way, though, you have to loop in the rest of the people on the team and say, just so you guys know, I've talked to Fred. And I'm working on that, and I don't want you to think I'm ignoring it.
Right.
See, the problem is when we do everything offline, one-on-one, it leaves everybody else wondering, well, can I act that way? Is anybody going to hold Fred accountable? Is the CEO? And then you're like, well, I'm being nice to Fred. Well, what you're doing is you're creating a bunch of problems on the team.
There you go. And they're wondering, maybe it was worse than it really happened. Because when I've seen you model this, you came on site with our executive team, and you were helping us navigate conflict, and you made it not weird. I'm sure you've done this in other rooms, but the time you did it with me was, hey, Matt, you're doing that thing again. That thing where you kind of over talk and over galvanize the room. We get it. You don't have to keep talking. I was like, that wasn't rude. And I don't know if you remember that. It wasn't rude and obnoxious, but I think people build it out. It's like, oh, I don't want to hurt Matt's feelings. I don't want to come out and say it.
Well, what's interesting is I kind of don't remember it, but I do remember it a little bit, but it wasn't like a major thing because I'm kind of used to doing that.
Yeah.
But you know what the key is? There's 2 keys to doing that. Because a lot of CEOs are like, oh, I'd like to do that. But the key to doing that is first leading with yourself. In other words, being able to say, I know what I do. I do this and I do this, and people tell me I shouldn't. And so you guys got to know that you can call me on it because I'm not perfect. Yeah. Then when you do it for somebody else, nobody thinks you're like trying to condescend or put them down. You're like, oh, he would do it too. Right. The other thing is, if you have some tool that explains why that person acts that way. And like, whether it's like the Working Genius or the Myers-Briggs, you can go, oh, I know that you have a tendency to do that because that's how God wired you. And that's okay. That's probably just not appropriate now. It's not saying you should change who you are, man. You're flawed. It's saying, hey, I don't think this is the best time to do that. And I realize it comes naturally to you. So maybe we need to kind of moderate that.
I love it.
So this concept of public accountability can often feel uncomfortable because depending on how you lead, this could be a very new idea. Like, seriously, you're asking me to call people out in a meeting, which I feel like what you shared, that was a new concept for you. And I know this has been transformative to your own leadership, Matt. So why was this concept such a big light bulb moment for you as a leader?
I definitely fell into the trap because I'm such an advocate for effective one-on-ones. I definitely fell into the trap of like pushing too much into one-on-ones because what's the old saying? Praise in public, correct in private. That I think is a fallacy, and I think it's really dangerous for the workplace. Patrick Lencioni says that correction should be done in public unless it's dishonoring to the or embarrassing to the individual. So unless you're shaming them publicly, if it's not shaming them, if it's just uncomfortable, it actually should be done in public for a whole bunch of reasons. So out of all of the things that I think have been the lessons in leadership for me over the last 12 months, this is the one that I've changed the most in just my approach and how to handle conflict, deal with conflict. And if you've been on if you've reported to me or been on my executive team, you probably felt a lot more uncomfortable working with me in the last year than you did prior to that. At least maybe more uncomfortable in public settings, not in private settings.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because personally, I was one of the loud voices that like really challenged you on this concept.
Yeah.
Because personally, I loved it. I don't feel, more uncomfortable with you. I feel more comfortable because here's why. So previously, and we touched on this a little bit in a few episodes ago, we were talking about the 5 dysfunctions of a team with Patrick Lencioni and how like our executive team took it. And one of the learnings was that we were very siloed, and we looked at our teams as like, you're the department owner, you own this, it's your responsibility, leave everybody else alone, etc. So we were all really aligned with you as the CEO. It was like, and you knew all the things that were happening across the board. But one of the frustrations for me personally was I didn't know what was going on in Garrett's world. Right. And I didn't know and even though we would have one-on-ones, Garrett felt like, oh, I've already talked to Matt about that. Why would I talk to Holly about that?
Right.
And so I would find out about things after the decision was already made, because we weren't, I guess at the end of the day, to me personally, we were not functioning as a true team.
Right.
We were functioning as a group of very high functioning individuals.
Right.
On Matt's team, right? But it wasn't like our team. And so that, I feel like when Pat came and worked with our executive team and pointed that out through that 5 dysfunctions assessment, and really challenged us, like, no, those conversations should be happening in team meetings, not just in one-on-ones. That was a big shift for you.
And if people out there are practically wondering what this actually looks like, do you want to share a few like real life examples of either when you did it for us or when we've done it as a team? Because people out there might be thinking like, I don't get it. Like, you're going to start correcting people, giving feedback to people with their peers there. That sounds like really rude and like unfair. So do you want to like, let's just go there. Let's just share some active examples, and then we can go get permission from the rest of ELT after we do the podcast.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, one example I remember for me, so I don't even remember what the topic was, honestly. I'm trying to think. I don't know. It's irrelevant what the topic was, but we were having a pretty heated debate in the executive team meeting. And I think I felt like I was the only one that had a different opinion. It felt to me like all 4 of you guys were aligned and I was sharing the counter perspective. And so it got to a point where I don't remember exactly what I said, but I said something like, well, it must just be a me problem. And I just kind of like in like my body language and everything disengaged. And you said, nope, Holly, you just disengaged. Come on back to the conversation. Like, we need your voice in this conversation. So that was an example of like, I feel like where previously you would have waited
until after the meeting, and I would have come and talked to you, and everyone would have wondered, I wonder if Matt talked to Holly.
Yep.
But
exactly.
Let's just go back a second, because you said it wasn't that uncomfortable. I found when I remember calling you out, and I found that personally uncomfortable.
Really?
Of course. It's weird. It's like,
no.
it's like you and I have a great working relationship. You have got a lot going on. You probably had a stressful day and you're disengaging. And now in front of the people that you work with, your boss is being like, hey, you're disengaging. Like
Come on
that's,
back.
yeah. And so even in the moment and after the moment, you weren't like, you're like, Matt, that's so rude. Like, how dare you make me look bad in front of my colleagues?
No, the way that I perceived it was, number one, I felt seen and known because the way you handled it, and maybe it's just your Kiwiism where you guys think you're being mean, but you're so polite. It's like everything that you and Christy say sounds polite. But I felt I was like, no, you're right. Like that is not okay for me to disengage. It made me feel like I was a critical part of the team because
Mhm.
I feel like if you had just let me have a pass, it would have been like, okay, yeah, her opinion doesn't really matter anyways. Let's just move on
Yeah.
because she's clearly heated about this thing.
So now I want to challenge you to maybe, is this uniquely you? Would most people be like, I am not like that? Like Holly clearly
Oh,
doesn't
I
have an
don't know.
ego. Holly's like must be so humble to be able to be called out in front of her peers. So is this like something that's just one of your superpowers and everyone else might find really uncomfortable?
I don't know, but you asking me that question just brought up a previous experience that I had, which was really hurtful for me. So, okay, here's an example
Hmm.
where this happened, where it was hurtful. So I was in a meeting with two other leaders that were both senior to me on the org chart.
Hmm.
And same thing, we were having a really important, I think it was about compensation. Like we were having a really heated conversation about something really important. And one of the leaders interrupted me and said, Holly, you're too animated. And
Hmm.
like basically shut me down. And I walked away from that because it felt like criticism of my personality.
Got it. It's not criticism. That's the difference.
Yes. So the way you handled it, and that was very hurtful. Because I was like, I felt like it was like, I care about this company and I care about this topic because it affects our bottom line and the
Hmm.
people that work here. And so I felt like that person was like shooting down my passion for the
Hmm.
company, you know? Whereas I felt like what you were doing was saying, hey, we need your voice in this conversation, right?
Right. Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So
Well, okay. I don't know. Maybe other people would be easier with this. I still find it, I know it's the right thing to do, but I still find it uncomfortable. So maybe you'll remember these. These have happened in the last month. Last week, I think, was it this week or last week? We were having a debate and it was about something that was outside of, we've talked earlier in the pod in one of the other episodes about CXO versus like CFO or CMO.
yeah,
CXO meaning like chief executive. And one of our, Brett, our CFO, who's our
yeah,
finance leader, often is really tuned in and focused when it's related to finance and related to HR. But if it's something about marketing or something with sales, it's really easy for him to tune out, which in some respects, fair enough, because
right.
he's the CFO. But I have had to call him out, and I find it uncomfortable a few times, and maybe you'll remember this, maybe you won't, where I'll be like, hey, Brett, we need your CXO hat right now, and you've tuned out. Like,
Yes.
I've said that to him in front of his peers, and I found that uncomfortable. There was another one. I don't know if you remember this one. This was a couple of weeks back. CJ, our CTO, we were having conflict around I think it was like a product roadmap thing. And he kept saying, let me think about it. Give me a few days. I'm going to process and think about it. And do you remember what I said? I was like,
Yeah.
no, we're
Yeah.
going to do this here. We're
Now.
going to do it now, even if that's the only other thing we cover in this meeting.
Yes. And see, and that's funny that you feel uncomfortable because what I see in both of those situations, again, it's in the story that I told and what you're doing with Brett and then what you did with CJ, it's because you want to hear their opinion. Their opinion
Right.
matters to
Right.
all of us. And we are
Yeah.
only our best team when all of us are engaged and contributing
Yeah.
to the conversation. So by you pushing through that discomfort and saying that, which I think we need to do better. It shouldn't just be you. I should also be saying, Brett, you're being quiet. We need your opinion.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I truly value your thoughts, even though you feel like you don't know anything about marketing. You're brilliant.
Yeah.
Want to hear your opinion on this. Um, so and again, I know I'm very collaborative. You've given me feedback before too, that sometimes you're like, Holly, you want to know too many things. Like, so I am more wired in that way.
Yeah. But I guess the point is, as uncomfortable it is to me, the point you're trying to make, and I hope what everyone can appreciate is like, you don't have to make it weird. Like,
Yes.
it's really not that weird. Like when Pat Lencioni was doing the offsite with me and my executive team, he was displaying examples of how to not to make this weird. Like, I think he did it to me when I was tuning out because someone was being long-winded. He goes, Matt, you're doing that thing again. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. And I just came right back in. And that was it. It took like 2 seconds. And so people like, it doesn't have to be this big deal. And so again, I think this idea of public accountability, it seems foreign. And I think it's because we bought into that myth of correct and private. It's just not effective.
Yeah. And again, this is not in a disrespectful, toxic, way. Pat
critical way. It's constructive, not criticism. I think what you said about criticism really kind of kicked off a light bulb for me because it's not an attack.
Yes. What exactly? And your downline will follow this. So great example. I just saw in Slack this morning. There's a channel with lots of different people in it about a project that's critical to moving our business forward. And I think maybe 1 or 2 times over the last week, somebody in that channel has asked for information from someone else in that channel and hasn't gotten a response. And so this morning they went in and put like the little eyes emoji, it was a very friendly way, but said, looking forward to an update on this.
Yeah, right.
I already asked 1 or 2 times and didn't get a response. And so I was like, ooh, like, let's see what happens here.
Yeah.
But to the other person's credit, they replied and said, thank you so much for the accountability. It's coming right now. Wow. And so how cool is that? That
is cool.
2 people removed from us on the executive team are now practicing peer public accountability in a respectful way.
Yep.
Because we're trying to push through that discomfort and model that, not perfectly, but as the executive team. So it really does trickle down.
That's really cool.
Okay, so a couple actionable insights. Practice public accountability. It is not easy, but if you have not read 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, start there. We did that as a team. Highly recommend it. I think that's a really, and if you feel like you're on a team where this is hard, read it together.
Yeah, it's good.
So that would be, it's
a very short book. You can knock it out in a couple of settings. It's super straightforward and simple. The whole book's a big, long analogy. It's story-based. It's really convicting, but challenging.
Yeah. So start there. And then out of those conversations, start practicing. Actually, Cody, the COO of the Table Group, Patrick Lencioni's company, I remember he told me one time that he was leading a team that was so uncomfortable with healthy conflict that he bought like a dumb trophy on Amazon. It was like so silly and tacky and gross, but hilarious. And so he said, I'm going to give the person who creates the most healthy conflict in a meeting gets this trophy.
I love it.
And so for the first 5 meetings, he gave it to himself. He was the only one. He's like, guys, I'm giving it to myself again. I'm giving it to myself, and then finally
that's so great.
Somebody else did it. So that's just like a silly way to kind of break the ice.
That's so good.
Get people to start practicing that. So, well, thanks, Matt. Thanks for the conversation. And let's, keep practicing that public accountability.
More accountability. Here we come.
But thanks for listening to the LeadrPulse Podcast. Hope you enjoyed today's episode with Patrick Lencioni, Matt Tresidder, and myself as we unpacked this idea of should you talk about politics in the workplace? I don't know about you, but I walked away with some actionable insights around really driving clarity around our mission and our values. We'd love for you to check out the Leadr Advantage, which is our platform in partnership with Pat and the Table Group. You can check it out at leadr.com/table-group. That's leadr.com/table-group. You can also just go to our homepage and talk to our team, learn more. There at the top header, it says the Leadr Advantage. You can check it out right there. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the LeadrPulse Podcast.